I often will review documentation written by our engineers, and it's very verbose. There's a lot of words, and sometimes if it's more of like a guide or a how-to format, they may either skip steps or not have enough prerequisite information. What I have noticed with our technical writers is they are very detail oriented. And I don't mean this in a way that they're writing a lot of words to describe what's going on, but they are very critical of the process and very critical of the details. So they go in and do reviews, or when they're outlining their content, they want all of their questions answered up front. What do I need to be successful with this? If I'm writing a how-to guide or tutorial, they will want to step through it to be able to make sure that they can verify that what they are writing adequately reflects the experience.
Welcome to the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast, where Gauri Ramkumar of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
So good day, everyone. Today's guest is Amara Graham, Head of Developer Experience, Camunda. Welcome, Amara. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for asking. Happy to be here.
Brilliant. So, Amara, please help us explain a little bit more about yourself. How did you end up in your current role? What motivates you to do what you're doing currently? And then we'll start from this.
Sounds good. So I'm currently the head of developer experience. We have both documentation and SDKs, or what I like to say, kind of API experience under my current umbrella. How I got here was through a number of roles where I've always enabled developers. So I started in IT, where I was basically teaching other developers modern web development practices, bringing that into an organization that largely didn't have those skills yet. And then from there, learned about developer advocacy, developer relations, developer experience, and kind of stepped into that space. But I've always been enabling developers either through directly teaching them or providing some sort of written instructional content.
All right. Now, how was this transitioning from engineer-led to a technical writer-led documentation been for you, this cultural shift?
Yes. So at Camunda, before I joined, our engineers were writing our documentation, which was fantastic. That means they care a lot about documentation. They know what kind of goes into that. But as we've hired more technical writers, we can see that the docs produced by our engineering team were quite lengthy and either were missing certain aspects that technical writers would pick up on and say, oh, it's strange that we didn't document this, but we have so much information about this other aspect. We kind of started to see the difference between how engineers write and how technical writers write. So we're still actively working on that transition. We have some technical writers embedded on our feature or epic delivery teams, and we have some that still largely take care of the documentation themselves. But as we're doing reviews and as we're kind of reflecting on in-flight documentation and what we have already written, we're able to kind of see those differences. And so with that, we're developing more information for our internal style guide for the teams that want to continue writing. And then for teams that say, this is too much of a lift for us, or we're just not interested in this anymore, supporting them where we can. So either embedding a technical writer on that team or trying to figure out ways to support them, either early reviews or reviews kind of as they're progressing. But yeah, it's been super interesting because it's not that we didn't have documentation before. It was just a little bit different, and you're able to kind of see those clear differences between how engineers write and think about how they want to convey a message, and then how technical writers write and how they are using their skills a little bit differently.
It's just the style, isn't it? The style of the content being produced.
Exactly.
Great. Now, you did touch base upon this topic a little bit in the previous conversation, but can you please elaborate a little bit more on how technical writers can work effectively with engineers during this transition, so that the technical accuracy is also maintained, what the engineers want, at the same time, give the style that the technical writer would like to have?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we did initially was introduce a style guide. And we didn't introduce that in a way that was, here, read this 500-page style guide and start writing towards it. We knew that that was going to be too much. So we put together what we called a cheat sheet. And it was basically, what are the most significant style choices that we wanted to correct, and started to kind of educate our engineers that way. At that point in time, we really only had one technical writer, and that it would be impossible for her to be able to review all of that content or write all of that content. But we introduced the style guide, and then we also chose a style guide, or made choices, I guess I should say, around the Google writing style guide, because they offered technical writing courses that some of our engineers were interested in. So we made choices based on that, based on content that, someone else had already pulled together, classes or courses that were already pulled together, so that we could send people that way. But from there, we started to build a case of, how many technical writers do we need to hire? What kind of skills are they bringing in? Why are we hiring these technical writers? And started to identify teams that either were already over capacity with their engineering work, or who had said, technical writing is very challenging for us. We're really not interested in diving into that skill set or that area. And could we kind of do more of that work for them? So it was a little bit of, how do we nurture the engineering teams who want better writing skills? And then how do we reflect on those teams who maybe either don't want to learn, don't have capacity, and how do we support them? And yeah, I think so far we've done a pretty good job of managing that transition. But I continue to come back to saying, like, the early days of building out a cheat sheet, identifying some of those really critical things that we needed to correct in the docs and in the writing to make it easier for us to do reviews, and aligning to a style guide that was already kind of well written. And we've made modifications to that at this point, so we don't really point our new engineers to the Google technical writing courses. But again, that was a great option for us, so that we didn't have to build like an internal course ourselves, which we are considering doing at this point. As we've built our writing style guide, do we need to do something that helps us kind of communicate what we're doing at Camunda, and how do we onboard those engineers who are still writing to that process?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the way the content is written by the developers versus technical writers, right? In particular, on the user experience, because that's something that very important for you. So in terms of the user experience, how does it differ? Documentation written by a developer versus a technical writer?
Oh, it's such a good question. It's one that I haven't thought a lot about. So this is very like off the top of my head. But I often will review documentation written by our engineers, and it's very verbose. There's a lot of words, and sometimes if it's more of like a guide or a how-to format, they may either skip steps or not have enough prerequisite information. And I can't blame them for that. I think throughout my entire career, when I've personally either written content or watched other people, it's difficult to pull yourself out of your writing. So you say, maybe you're accidentally writing for the persona that you represent, or the job description that you represent, and you forget little things like, oh, I have preset my environment variables. So if I'm building something out, maybe I forgot to add that. And so the person who doesn't have those environment variables set, they're not ultimately successful. What I have noticed with our technical writers is they are very detail oriented. And I don't mean this in a way that they're writing a lot of words to describe what's going on, but they are very critical of the process and very critical of the details. So they go in and do reviews, or when they're outlining their content, they want all of their questions answered up front. What do I need to be successful with this? If I'm writing a how-to guide or tutorial, they will want to step through it to be able to make sure that they can verify that what they are writing adequately reflects the experience. So that's one of the big things that I've noticed is, how do you remove yourself as maybe you're not the core persona for that content? And how do you make sure that someone who is not you has what they need to be successful? But yeah, the environment variables is a big one. And then the other one that I'm thinking of is our product has either a way that you can run it SaaS or a way that you can run it self-managed. And for our self-managed users, there's a lot of documentation around how do you set up the platform and making sure that we're setting up the platform in a way that those people are successful when others come run their applications on that. We need to make sure that they understand what to set, when they can set it, and what that means. So yeah, I think I just come back to the technical writers ask a lot of questions up front to make sure that they fully understand the problem and the scope of what they need to write towards. And again, while I say some of our engineers can do that as well, many of them approach writing from their persona, their job skills, their role, and it might not reflect what the documentation really needs to cover.
All right. That's a very insightful thought. Thank you. Now, just coming back to your LinkedIn profile, it says that your current role centers on enhancing developer enablement through documentation. Can you share some best practices that have proven effective in reducing barriers for developers?
Ooh, so identifying guides and how-to content. So when I started at Camunda, we were launching Camunda 8, which is our current product. And one of the things that we ran into was around the getting started experience. So we have 3 use cases that I'll say the business identified as things that we wanted to focus on. Some of that leans into different personas, some of that leans into the use cases, some of that leans into areas of the product that we expect certain personas would want to use. One of the things that I said very early on was I like use case based onboarding, but I was concerned that we would now have 3 entry points into the documentation and 3 journeys that we would have to nurture. And could we up level that to have one single getting started guide? We've kind of gone back and forth on that, but that's one of the things that I think I will continue thinking about maybe for the rest of my career is this: how do we seamlessly onboard people to our product experience, and can we onboard all of our personas through one single journey, one single use case, and then map out from there how they will work through the rest of our content or work through our product. So that's one of the things that I know my team thinks quite a bit about is how did the various personas consume our documentation? What are those entry points, particularly after getting started? And can they find those? Do they have what they need? We reflect on that through various things like Google Analytics and SEO, and looking at different keyword searches and making sure that people are able to find that. And if we can see any sort of flow through the documentation that we think is a bit strange, how do we adjust that? How do we make sure that people get to the information that they need efficiently, and they get those questions answered so that they can go back to solving the problem that they're actually trying to solve, not fighting our docs.
Yeah, I mean, I should say it's a tough one because we as a product company also go through a similar scenarios very often. Yeah, as you said, we just have to keep experimenting different options here.
Exactly, exactly. And people change their behavior too. So
Yeah.
even as your product evolves, there might be new entry points into your docs. Does that then cause us to say, oh, we might need a new guide on that topic? We see a lot
Mm.
of people who are maybe going to support and asking a lot of questions about a particular topic. Do we need to do something about that in docs?
Yeah.
What does that entail? That's one of those things that I think we're getting better at as we're hiring more technical writers, is really kind of doing that investigation around how do we improve things. Because I do want to make sure that developers feel enabled by the work that my team does.
True. Very true. Now, I'm sure you must be reading a lot of contents either on the web or via books or any other resources. So, any recommendations, something related to documentation from your side?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask this question, so I was thinking about this. I was like, oh, I've been so bad about reading books. I'm in an engineering manager's book club, so that's probably not what you're looking for. But I did want to mention that someone on my team, Christina Osley, just spoke at TC World this week. Um,
Okay.
and she's very passionate about that conference. So I don't know if they will publish those talks or make those available, but that's something that I wanted to promote and say, yeah, if you can check out her talk, that would be good.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure when it comes out, it's a big conference, right? Yeah,
Yes,
wonderful,
yes.
wonderful. So when I say documentation, what is that one word that comes to your mind?
Ooh, I think clarity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't ask for more because I said one word.
Like I could describe it. I think it's what we strive for as the team that owns documentation. As a consumer of documentation myself, it's what I look for and expect. But yeah, clarity. I think that's the word I'll choose.
Thank you. My last question is, so what is that one piece of documentation related advice you would give to your 20-year-old self?
Oh, so good. Uh, I would say critique things the way that you expect to get feedback. And this has been so important for myself now, many years older than 20. But it's something that my team and I think about quite often, is drive-by feedback or saying like, this is bad, or just, giving something a thumbs down with no additional context is just not productive. It may be one of those things where you're like, I'm frustrated or I'm annoyed, so I don't like this. But yeah, critique the way that you expect to get feedback, because I think that's an important learning for everyone to be able to say, this feedback is actionable. This is how I'm going to work through it. Don't make it a mystery.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just a thumbs down doesn't mean anything. We don't know what to change.
Exactly, exactly.
Especially when we have developers writing their own contents.
Exactly. And they look at that and they say, well, it worked for me, or I think this is fine. Like,
Yeah.
what do I do with that? So yeah, actionable feedback. And yeah, it's just kind of projecting what you expect from others and doing that. So I'm very careful with my feedback to make sure that it's actionable and thought through, even if it's frustrating for me.
Yeah. So, Amara, lovely. It was great having this chat with you today. And thank you once again for being my guest in this podcast series. It's given a different perceptions on how different styles of documentation can be produced from different segments, and how you are making sure that the right contents are going to the right people. So, good luck with all the projects. And yeah, thank you so much and have a lovely day.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.